What's up, y'all? It's Joe Masterly here, doing a follow-up video on this whole MxR Plays versus Jukin Media showdown. Now, while there are some reasons for y'all to celebrate, because MxR Plays has worked out a deal with Jukin Media that they're happy with, the reality is this problem around copyright trolling still exists. My concern here is that the abusive type of business dealings that Jukin Media has invested in will continue. And in fact, the kind of deal that they worked out with MxR Plays will only strengthen their position to continue going after more YouTubers. So let me explain what I mean by this. Now, first off, like so many people online who have said, taking in mind I'm no lawyer, I'm gonna add an additional piece here. While I am no lawyer, I am, however, a business executive. Someone has worked in the gaming / music / entertainment industry now for over 20 years, specifically working as a brand manager / product manager, as an executive who has worked on a lot of brands and IPs from Star Wars to Marvel to WWE, you name it, some of the biggest brands I've worked on. So I'm very familiar with how important it is to deal with copyrights and trademarks and patents. So it always concerns me when people who leave comments jump to quick conclusions on things like copyright laws, unfair use. Because it's easy to take a look at the case, and even if you look at the specific definitions of what fair use is. Now, to quickly summarize, Jukin Media is a company that has a whole number of video clips in their library, and they basically went after a YouTuber who happened to have used some of those clips. Now, this YouTuber, MxR Plays, a couple by the name of Henry and Jeannie. And yes, I know Jeannie's name is Jeannie, not Jenny, but for whatever reason in my last video, I kept mispronouncing her name, which I have a big problem with mispronouncing names, from Geralt of Rivia to Geralt of Rivia. Maybe the J and G for me has always been sort of a dyslexic sort of thing. But let's get back to the point here. I've basically been dealing with Jukin Media over, well, several occasions now. And because the first time they dealt with them, they actually paid up a rather hefty fee of a couple $1,000s to settle that scenario. The reality is they never actually hired a lawyer to deal with it. And once again, Jukin Media has come back claiming that more videos of theirs are infringing on the copyrights that Jukin Media has. And that's turned into a worldwide brouhaha because so many YouTubers, so many fans of theirs. MxR Plays has a lot of fans, over 1 million some across all their channels. This whole issue had really kind of got out of hand because a number of different fans have decided to take it an even step further and dox some of the executives, some of the people that work at Jukin Media, which is never cool. But through this warfare, they did manage to come to an agreement and settle things. Not only like a settlement in court, but rather come to an agreement in terms of how they can work out a deal. And I'm sure it's a deal that they can't talk about, and it's worked into the contract. Which brings me to my point here. Any of the benefits from exposing Jukin Media to this type of business practice is kind of swept under the rug. In my last video, I raised this point about how this isn't an issue of fair use, because the only way to be able to determine that is in court. Some online lawyers have said that they would side with Jukin Media, and other ones said, well, the case seems to be more in favor of MxR Plays. Tells you that going to court can be a costly proposition for both sides. Now, the reality is that one side of this equation has deep pockets. Now, that's Jukin Media. A company like this can basically threaten someone of going to court and still be able to deal with expenses of going to court. Now, I'm sure they don't want to go to court, right? The business model that they have set up here is about trying to extract money from these smaller YouTubers with the threat of not only legal action, but also copyright strikes, 3 of them from YouTube, which is not a legal matter, but a policy matter. And that's enough to get most people to pay up. So herein lies the rub then. Even though you think this is settled, the reality is that if you take a look at this from a business perspective, right? And this is how I look at things, not from a legal perspective, which I'm sure lawyers will always recommend things. Businesses ultimately have to make business decisions. That's why oftentimes businesses will do things against even the advice of their legal counsel. The point is, which method makes more money? And for the one that perhaps makes more money, which has riskier outcomes, is it worth that risk in the long run? It's become increasingly clear that this type of business practice that they're involved with, which is going after small YouTubers, asking them to pay up several $1,000s at a time, not just the $50-some that they want for the copyright usage fee, is a pretty big part of their business. So for me, I'm thinking about whether or not there is any incentive for them to quit doing this. Because you have to think of the implications here. Whether you're an executive of that company who's responsible for the financial outcome of that company, or if you're a stakeholder, a investor, if you will, you're looking for a scenario that doesn't change your trajectory, your forecast for that company. And let's say this particular part of the business is substantial. And by substantial, I don't have to even say it's a majority of their business. It could even be 10 to 20%. Well, if you suddenly cut off 10 to 20% of your bottom line, that's not going to look good. That's going to hurt you as a company. And in fact, it's not only going to hurt you as a company, chances are it's probably going to affect the bonuses of all the people who are making the decisions of whether or not they should continue to do business like this. So in other words, unless they have some other business opportunity lined up to supplant this hole that they now have, they're not going to drop this type of opportunity that they have. And I've seen this happen so many times in the industry already. These type of cases, these type of opportunities for these companies that are specifically structured this way, they continue to exist, despite the fact that there are laws now that are continually put in place that treat these kind of things as frivolous cases, if you will. Jukin Media is coming across like copyright trolls. They're operating very similar to patent trolls, something that I've had to deal with before. And in fact, patent trolls have gotten so out of hand that way back in 2013, different types of laws were passed to try to curb companies from issuing thousands of threats to small businesses, coercing them to pay up. And the courts have recognized that this is not only frivolous, but it's abusive. In fact, I'm going to read to you here something that a congressman had said, and just listen to how familiar it sounds to what Jukin Media is doing. Intimidating small businesses, entrepreneurs, and nonprofits with vague demand letters has become one of the most common ways that patent trolls take advantage of the lack of transparency in our patent system. The targets of these demand letters are often left to decide whether or not to enter into expensive litigation without knowing any of the details regarding the patent in question, whose rights are being infringed, or how often similar demand letters are sent. Jukin Media has a whole host of lawyers, a whole host of executives that have built a lucrative business around doing this kind of business. And they're very smart about trying to adjust course to deal with these kind of things. If the opportunities still exist, they will continue to do it. Now, to me, the only way this type of thing will eventually go away for Jukin Media is if a case eventually goes so big on a national level and that copyright laws get absolutely clarified and they lose everything. That's unlikely to happen. Or one aspect of the business model starts to break, right? Either the supply side of the content starts to stop coming in, or the demand side stops coming in. And you have to take a look at those scenarios. Would Jukin Media ever run into a situation where people who happen to film something funny that's happened to them on their life, on their cell phone, won't take a couple $100s or a couple $1,000s to sell it to somebody? The chances are most people would do it. That pipeline is unlikely to ever stop. Maybe in the short term, some of the supply has slowed down because of so many of the MxR fans out there that are writing to people on Twitter and on social media saying, don't get yourself involved with Jukin Media. They're a bad company. A lot of different websites are out there now and articles are written where if you Google Jukin Media, it comes up looking very, very negative. Give enough time and you have a whole host of people who are very willing to sell their content for a couple $100 or a couple $1,000. Now, in terms of the demand side, I don't think there's a demand for this type of business model, right? The whole point of this type of business model is to catch YouTubers off guard. The only way the business model is going to change for Jukin Media is if the demand from larger corporate entities starts to dry up. That's because Jukin Media has a number of different business lines where they sell this type of content to other companies. Companies that have, say, TV shows that run these type of clips and they have hosts that react to them, right? You've probably seen them on TV. Yeah, they buy that content from Jukin Media. It's a big part of their business. And in fact, Jukin Media has a number of channels that they started up that are specifically dedicated towards this type of content. Now, I'm not sharing all this to get all you MxR Plays fans out there depressed or try to reason with you to say like, man, this actually isn't a good scenario. I'm simply summarizing the business landscape. And this isn't a question of whether or not they have to protect their rights, but whether or not their method comes across like extortion. until something like that is brought to case, until this is treated as a frivolous lawsuit and they get deemed in court, I don't see why they would stop. Let me know what you all think. I'm not interested in hearing from lawyers because I think actually all the lawyers have already shared what their thoughts are. I'm more specifically interested in, if you were running this company, what would you do? If you were an executive running Jukin Media, would you continue still doing this type of business? All right, y'all, I'm sure you got a lot of comments that you're gonna leave. Feel free to leave them below. Happy to address anything that has come along. And I just wanna summarize that I'm really happy to see Henry and Jeannie work things out so they don't have that legal threat hanging over them, because I can tell you it is one of the most stressful things having to live with that hanging over your head. It's not just something that hangs over your head for 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days. This kind of litigation, these kind of issues can go on weeks, months, years, sometimes even decades, and you just don't want to get caught up in that. All right, y'all, peace out.